Howdy folks, my name is John Sprott. I play with a band around here. I play guitar for a living, and I'm going to tell you some things about electric guitar and acoustic guitar. Tell you about rock lead styles and country lead styles, and try and get into some swing styles and some blues styles for you. Also going to get into some special techniques like finger tapping. In other words, tapping your left hand on the fretboard. This assumes that you're right-handed, of course. Slide styles, different ways to play harmonics, and special uses of the whammy bar. Try and tell you all about some rock rhythm styles too. I'm going to try and tell you all about sort of my approach to acoustic guitar, finger picking, flat picking, cross picking, Travis picking, some rag and blues stuff, and alternate tunings, which are a big part of acoustical styles, and some electrical styles, but more so acoustic. And I'm going to try and tell y'all some about equipment. I don't use very much, but what I use, I'll try and be educational on. Starting back up at the top, I guess be as good a place as any. Most of y'all, I imagine, want to learn how to play rock and roll guitar. Well, a lot of rock and roll guitar it's more an attitude than specific notes or anything like that. But there are some specific things to it. The tone used in rock and roll guitar is usually kind of aggressive. Generally speaking, it's overdriven a little bit. By that I mean it's distorted some. And a good starting place for a rock tone is the bridge pickup, which on this guitar I select by doing that. That produces a kind of a sharp sort of a tone. Rock lead styles are generally based more around a minor pentatonic kind of approach. Rock lead styles don't usually use a flatted fifth or things like that. The scales used in rock are usually pretty straightforward. Bending is a real popular technique in rock, owing in large part to the fact that rock was kind of derived from blues, and I think blues is where all this string bending stuff came from. And subtle vibrato techniques that you can put on the string. I think that's germane to rock and roll too. But a lot of what rock and roll is licks. In other words, taking phrases, note phrases, and kind of putting them together. Hopefully you can do that with in such a way that it doesn't sound mechanical. I try and keep the connection between my brain and my heart and the fretboard open, so it doesn't sound like I'm just playing repetitive scales or repetitive licks or stuff like that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I think it's a good thing to do to try and maintain some honesty about that. An example of rock and roll guitar, I think, Chuck Berry was probably the first guy that did a definitive rock style, and his technique was almost always employed playing more than one string at a time while he was playing leads. and maybe bending one or more strings while he was playing. An example of Chuck Berry style lead would be playing in A. It's a more chordal style of lead. This is kind of what it sounds like. And like that. It's a real fat kind of a style, and I think that a lot of Chuck Berry's techniques were adopted by other players who were playing during the rockabilly period. The rockabilly stuff, rockabilly lead, in a way led up to the lead styles that you hear today, but it's more connected with blues. The thing about styles of guitar is they tend to bleed one into the other. But I don't know, I think you can say Chuck's style is pretty much rock. A guy who had a completely different technique as far as the stuff that he did was Jimmy Page. He probably, I think, pretty much established the minor pentatonic kind of style of playing, where you use a minor third and not as much bending, although Jimmy Page would occasionally throw some blues licks in there. But and also he would use these repetitive kind of fast licks, like there's some things on a song they did called Heartbreaker that sound kind of like. Etc., etc., etc. That kind of thing, and that's kind of a funny style because you can play almost all of it with 2 fingers. That's a lot of people refer to that as 2-finger lead. But it's gosh, I sure do a lot of it. You know, I wouldn't put it down because I'd be in deep trouble if I did. Another rock player that was very seminal was Jimi Hendrix. You can't ignore that guy. Jimmy's roots were blues. A lot of what Jimi Hendrix did, I think, was derived from guys like Freddie King and old blues artists. Now he would take those licks and play them with a wah-wah pedal or with special effects or with tons and tons of overdrive, distortion. In other words, basically turning the gain on his amp way up. And that, combined with a little bit more aggressive attitude he had than the blues players, brought a completely different flavor to that music. A matter of fact, some of the things that Jimmy did was straight blues. Red House is a straight blues song, and that's on the very first Jimi Hendrix album, and that's just, I mean, that really is. It's a bunch of Freddie King kind of. Jimmy used a lot of different tones. One of his favorites was a neck pickup kind of a tone. Sound kind of like this. Stevie Ray Vaughan, I think, took a lot of cues from Jimi Hendrix. I'm personally glad that somebody did. A lot of people used it, but I think Stevie Ray Vaughan used the Jimi Hendrix approach to things just about better than anybody. Robin Trower is another guy who's, I think, owes a lot to that style, to that bluesy, psychedelic blues kind of a style. Most of the stuff that I've been playing thus far has been out of a bar kind of a position. In other words, in A, most of these riffs that I've been playing so far kind of circulate out of this this bar chord pattern. They're all out of this position. In other words, for A, they all come back to this to this fifth fret. Almost all the notes that I end up on after one of these licks are part of that A chord. That's probably the easiest place to begin whenever you're playing, learning to play rock and roll guitar, is the various notes that you can play that come out of a bar chord kind of a position. For one thing, it's a real easy thing to reference. In other words, if you're playing in C, you find a C bar chord, and then you start working the things that come out of that. Probably the most basic thing is this. Say we're in C, move 3 frets up from where you have your bar for your C on the B string. Bend that up, and you've bent up to a C, and also 3 frets up from that same bar position is a minor third. You can bend it up if you want. Lower down on the strings, that bar, up from that bar like a one whole step. In other words, 2 frets. Those notes are all in the minor pentatonic scale, and they're real easy to get to from that position. I'm kind of slipping into some blues styles here. That's really what I base my style around is blues. There are other licks and things that you can move up and down from that aren't based out of that same position. I'll move back down to A for a while. You can move up to a position about 3 or 4 frets above that A that you're playing. Find that A there, and another thing you can do is kind of sneak up behind that A bar position, or whatever bar position you're in, whether it's C or G or D or whatever. You can kind of come up behind that, and there's some things that you can do. You can kind of get into some country flavored kind of stuff that way. As far as rock and roll guitar goes, there's also some special techniques that I'm sure you've seen a lot of people do. The deal where you tap your right hand on the fretboard, or you alternate tapping your left and right hands on the fretboard. There's another thing that you can do that I do more of because I'm just more comfortable doing it, is kind of find a home note with your right hand behind your left hand and do pull-offs basically. And I'm personally a little bit more comfortable moving. If I have to move either hand fast at all, I'm more comfortable moving my left hand. So that's kind of, whenever it comes to special effects, kind of fretboard tapping and stuff like that, that's kind of what I tend to fall into. But there's also kinds of runs where you do tapping with you know, 3 fingers or 4 fingers. I haven't mastered any of that, but you try and do it sort of in sequence. The guys that are really fast with that make it sound real good. Eddie Van Halen does a lot of that, and he's certainly a frightening player. Getting into some different styles of stuff. I played some country western for a while, and I developed a love for some of the melodies that the guys playing swing fiddle and swing guitar. The guy Ernest Tubb and the Texas Troubadours and people like that. That's where I got a lot of the swing rockabilly kind of licks. A lot of swing licks move in half steps. Whenever you're trying to find some swing flavored stuff, experiment with some half step kind of things. You'll find some things that sound very appropriate. Swing, as a general rule, doesn't, and light jazz, you don't hear as much string bending as in that. That'll be accomplished more through glissandos, in other words, sliding up to a note. And that are just playing up to it, legitimately playing up to it. Let's see. Some of your rock licks every now and then can kind of, you can kind of filter them into that, but try and use your ear. Try not to play things that are not appropriate. I would encourage you, as you're listening to this tape and listening to the other guys playing on it, try and use your ear to pick these things out as much as you use your eyes watching where everybody's fingers are at. Your ear is extremely important. Try and develop that as much as you can. Other style I wanted to get into was blues, and for me that's a very all-encompassing kind of a term. Almost any riff that I play, I can apply to a blues song. And that's not really true of say I can get into a jazz ensemble or something like that, and I'm limited to what I can play there. Or I can get into a country kind of ensemble, and I'm limited to the things that are appropriate there. But blues, it seems like nearly anything, if it's done in the right context, in the right place, is legal. There are tools that you have to make that work. You have to be able to phrase in order to play lead guitar, and especially whenever you're playing blues. Whenever you're playing guitar, kind of think about how a horn player plays. A horn player necessarily has to stop playing every now and then for the simple fact that you have to take a breath if you're playing horn. I kind of think that people who are listening to solos need to be let up for air every now and then. So those spaces serve to punctuate things. They serve to enhance the dynamics of what you're doing. They just make what you're doing a whole lot more listenable. In other words, if you're playing along, play a phrase, stop, play another phrase, stop, and so on down the line. You might, at the end of several short phrases, play a long, intricate phrase, but try not to just keep sawing on your guitar. You'll generally start to notice empty seats in front of you after you play, a long solo that just doesn't stop, unless you're just an unbelievable guitar player, which I sincerely hope that you eventually get to be or are already. For myself, I've got to stop playing every now and then. Try and punctuate your phrases with some legato notes. By legato, I mean extended, long, flowing kinds of notes instead of legato as opposed to staccato. Staccato, legato, a long kind of a note. Use that in your phrasing. Variety will keep your solos alive. That will really go a long ways towards keeping your solos interesting. Also got to play some country, and I'll show you a few of those techniques. Some of those employ some kind of special right-hand techniques. One thing that I do in order to be able to play two strings at once is I'll play one of the strings with my pick and the other string with one of my fingers. I'm not sure exactly what the name for that style is. I've heard some people call it chicken picking, but I don't know if that's really correct. But a lot of those country styles will involve bending one string while you're holding a note steady on the other string. A lot of country licks kind of duplicate steel guitar licks. A steel guitarist has a set of pedals under his instrument whereby he can pull one or more strings to another note while he's holding one position with his slide. You can accomplish the same thing by bending one string while you're holding one steady. Sometimes you're going to have to let the other strings die, but a lot of times this can be done in a way as to sort of give the illusion that you're playing steel guitar. The guy that played with Dwight Yoakam's band, I think, has just a fabulous style where he's he almost sounds like the steel players from the 40s that didn't have pedals and who instead would reach behind their slides with their little fingers and actually pull one of the strings up out of tune. But they would seldom ever do more than one string that way, because it's extremely difficult. I think that's why they invented pedal steels. Listen to that guy. He's real interesting where that's concerned. Some other special techniques. Harmonics are a lot of times a real interesting thing to put in a solo to add some more textural variety to what you're doing. I think everybody knows what harmonics is. Well, if you don't, these are harmonics. Your first harmonic is here, second harmonic, third harmonic, and so on. The higher the harmonic, the higher the number of the harmonic, the higher the pitch of the harmonic. Some of the harmonics that you work with whenever you're playing rock and roll guitar are fairly random. In other words, you're not going so much for a specific note whenever you play for it. It's just to get a different texture into the note that you're playing. One way to do that is by holding the pick up very close to your thumb as you strike the string. And what you basically do is you allow the string to roll off the edge of the pick onto your thumb, and that transient causes a higher note to happen along with the note that you're playing. But like I said, it's kind of hard to really control exactly which note you're going to play with that harmonic when. That can be altered by striking the string at different points up and down its length. In other words, that's a nice effect to put in there. Another way to make harmonics happen, I can't do it with this guitar, but those of you with Fender Stratocasters out there, or hot-rodded kind of Fender Stratocasters, if you just lay your finger across, say the 3rd fret or the 4th fret, and drop your tremolo all the way down to the body to where the strings are limp, the magnets on those Fender pickups will suck the strings right up to the magnets, and then whenever you let the tremolo bar up, at the same time release the pressure you have on the strings. Whenever you're doing this, you're not actually fretting the strings. You just have your finger laid loosely across those strings in the same position as the fret. And as those strings pull away from the pickup, that transient of them popping away from the pickup will cause a real nice kind of random harmonic to occur. I wish I could show you with this guitar, but the magnetic pull of the pickups just isn't enough. Another kind of harmonic, sort of a special effect that you can do, is to pick the string at one end of the string. In this case, I'm going to pick the E string, and then move your finger, just laying your finger loosely on the string, move your finger up and down the length of the string. Kind of do a mandolin style, move your pick back and forth real quickly. And that also works down here, by the way. Just sort of another interesting kind of a texture. Another interesting kind of harmonic technique. Most harmonic kinds of techniques involve just touching the string, just barely touching the string. And in this particular harmonic technique, what you do is you very, very loosely move your index finger or whatever up and down the string, barely touching it, as you do a pull-off down here. And by pull-off, I mean you basically do that, then you move your finger up and down it, and you will get this which is another kind of interesting sound to put in there. A lot of guitar special effects aren't really centered around specific notes or scales. You want to kind of try and use these things sparingly because if you use them too much, they're non-musical. They're kind of irritating. After you learn some guitar, learn some lead licks, there's some visual things that you can do if you're playing in front of an audience. One of my favorite things to do is to play slide with a mic stand. I developed this for a couple of reasons. One is, it doesn't seem like I can keep track of slides. I just lose the darn things. But there's always a mic stand at a gig. So I started using the mic stand. The side benefit of that is that the mic stand is about 30 or 40 times bigger than a slide, and as you move it back and forth, it creates a real major visual kind of effect, and people find that entertaining. So I'll demonstrate that. Just happened to bring a mic stand. All right. Whenever I'm playing slide, I prefer to use pretty high gain levels. Tends to make the guitar sustain a little bit, thickens the tone up and stuff like that. Anyway, this is how I play slide, because I can't keep a hold of a slide. Anyway, people like that. Do that sometime. People will be entertained. Next, I'd like to get into some acoustic techniques. This is my acoustic guitar. It's a little bitty tiny thing. Like to cover some different acoustic guitar styles. Probably the first acoustic music I ever heard whenever I was growing up was Joan Baez and folk people like that. And most of those people were fairly accomplished finger pickers. Although a lot of folk is played with a flat pick. Folk in a lot of ways owes a lot to the old Delta blues pickers like Mississippi John Hurt, and people like that who were really pretty intense fingerstyle people. One of the first finger picking patterns I learned was just basically a thumb and forefinger thing, where you form a chord down here, and then you basically just alternate between your thumb and forefinger, and you alternate which bass string you're hitting with your thumb, and you alternate which higher string you're hitting with your index finger. It's just a real simple rhythmic style. I think that's a good place to start whenever you're learning to finger pick. One of the principles that is good to get down first is that principle of alternating bass strings with your thumb. Now, if you already play banjo, you're real used to that, but you're going to have to get used to doing it backwards from the way you do it now if you play 5-string banjo. On a guitar, you're generally going to want to hit the tonic string first. And by that I mean, say if I'm playing an A chord, I'm going to want to hit an A bass, will be the first note I hit. And then if I'm just playing with my index finger in addition to my thumb, then I'll be playing something like. After you become a little bit more adept at that, then you can move up to doing some Travis style picking, using the rest of your fingers. People like Joan Baez were fond of using their fingers kind of in sequence. In other words, playing a bass string and then 3 strings higher in low to high sequence. In other words, and sometimes reversing the pattern that they played with their 3 fingers. In other words, going up and then down for a waltz kind of effect or whatever like that. Finger picking nowadays is kind of an esoteric thing, but it's a good skill to work on because there's a resurgence of blues styles. I'm hearing on the radio nowadays some pretty authentic blues stuff. So and a lot of that's finger style stuff. So work on these things. It's a lot of fun too. It's a neat style. Another folk style. You play with a pick, and you try and basically do some of the same things that you do whenever you're finger picking, but you just do it with a pick. I generally refer to that technique as cross picking. On that style, basically what I'm trying to do is duplicate that finger picking style, where on the downbeat, in other words on the 1 and the 3 of each measure, I'm trying to play the tonic bass note of the chord, and then syncopate the other notes in a similar fashion to what I would when I'd be finger picking it. An example would be like in C, on the 2s and 4s, I might play a 5 of the chord. In other words, in C I would be playing a G. And on the 1s and 3s I'd be playing that tonic. That gives it kind of a root fifth. In other words, by root fifth root, I'm referring to the C, and by the fifth, I'm referring to the G. That gives it that kind of country bass line sort of a feel. A lot of country acoustic rhythm players will almost duplicate what's being played on the bass as far as the bass content of what they're playing on their guitars. Cross-picking is also a bluegrass kind of a style. Bluegrass is in a lot of ways kind of a hybrid of the old banjo straight strumming style and blues styles and jazz styles. A lot of bluegrass kind of style on guitar will involve playing a chord, establishing a chord, and then playing a little melody in alternation with it. Etc., etc. Another thing I want to get into is alternate tunings. Alternate tunings, among other things, enhance one's ability to play slide guitar. Whenever you're playing slide, what you're basically dealing with is a fixed bar, and you have to deal with the way the guitar is tuned. In other words, the notes that the guitar is tuned to, because obviously you can't extend parts of a slide up to different positions on the neck as you would your fingers, although it's possible to extend your fingers past a slide or whatever like that and get some effects like that. Most slide playing is done pretty much just with the slide and not by mixing your fingers in, to do some fretting as well. It's possible to play a slide in standard guitar tuning. In other words, I call it concert, where your guitar is tuned to E, A, D, G, B, and E. But you can't play the full breadth of the strings. If you play all the strings all the way across, it doesn't sound like a real chord. See if I can give you all some examples of playing slide with the guitar tuned to normal concert type tuning. Say if I was playing an E, I'd play some licks kind of like. etc. But what you can do chordally, as far as how thick you can make the chord sound, is kind of limited that way. So what you do is you start using some alternate tunings. One good alternate slide tuning is to tune your guitar to where whenever you strum the guitar open like that, it forms the voicing of an open E chord. Instead of tuning these three, instead of tuning the A, D, and G strings up, though, I'm going to tune the E, B, and E strings down and make a open D tuning. But basically, with it's just an open E chord voicing one step down. I just tuned this string down to a D, a full step. Tune the B down to a A. Tune the G down to F sharp. And tune the low E down to a D. See, now whenever I strum the guitar, I don't have to even touch it, and it's making a chord. And now I can get these real full sounds whenever I play slide with it. That's one alternate tuning. Another alternate tuning is a G, open G tuning. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to tune the B string back up to a B, and I'm going to tune the G string back from F sharp up to G. And I'm going to tune the A string down to a G. And see, that's a chord. Once again, that's a full, open kind of a chord. And you can do a lot of the same things with that. A lot of people used an open G tuning to play fretted guitars, and a conventional guitar, I should say. Keith Richards was crazy about using open G type tuning. And you'd get things like little snippets like that. If you want to find some Keith Richards stuff, tune your guitar up in open G and go hunting. It's a lot of fun. That's another thing, is whenever you strum a full set of harmonics, strum the same harmonic on all 6 strings, you just get this really nice full sounding harmonic. So it's a fun thing to do whenever you're playing acoustic guitar. Another open tuning that's I first saw it being used by a fellow named Terry Warren. He's the expert on this, I think, is open C tuning. And what he does is he tunes that leaves the E string at E, tunes that B string up to a C. Leaves the G, B. And then tunes his D string down to a C. Tunes the A string down to a G. And then tunes his E string all the way down to a low C. So he has a really, really low note there to work with whenever he's playing slide. Experiment with that one some. That's a lot of fun. Now if you tune your guitar up and down a whole lot, you'll eventually weaken the strings and they'll break. As I said, some alternate tunings are very useful whenever you're playing conventional guitar. In other words, when you're not playing slide. Open D is I think, a real good one for that. Show you some stuff in that. Whenever you're playing in open tunings, all your scales and all your positions are going to change radically from what you're used to whenever you're playing guitar tuned in concert tuning. So you just kind of have to improvise and sort of fumble your way around and see what you can find. But you'll stumble into a lot of real authentic blues styles that way. A lot of the old-time blues pickers used open tunings. If any of you are into that, experiment with some of these open tunings. I think you'll find that some of those songs will open up to you. And start finding your way around them a lot easier. If you don't have one of these things, one of these acoustic guitars, get you one. They're a lot of fun. Good to learn how to milk notes out of an electric guitar with. Not having the help of an amplifier a lot of times will sharpen your technique just as far as being able to get those notes to kind of sing. To wrap things up, well, actually, I don't know where this is going to be on the tape, so forget what I just said. Give you kind of an overview of the equipment that I use. I've used a lot of different kind of amps over the years. I've used some solid state ones and used Fender amps and played mostly on Fenders for 17 years, and finally broke down and went and got one of these dang Marshall things. For warmth of tone and for I don't know, for having a smooth musical quality to your overdrive, I recommend finding a tube amp. There's two companies to me that have pretty much established themselves as far as that. Fender and Marshall have been making tube amps for a long time. The Marshall circuit, from what I understand, is basically a modification of the 4x10 Fender Bassman circuit from back in the 50s. If you can ever lay your hands on an old 4x10 Fender Bassman, that's probably, for tube amp lovers, is probably the ultimate amp. They're incredible amps. But just overall, I recommend tube amps for guitar players in general. I think that's probably the best thing. I've kind of settled on these Marshalls. To me, they get the best tone. Whenever you're choosing an amp, get one that'll do what you need it to do. In other words, make sure that you get one that's loud enough. If you're going to be doing much playing on stage, particularly in a situation to where your amplifier isn't going to be supported by a sound reinforcement system, a PA, if it's not going to be mic'd up, I think 50 watts, a 50-watt tube amp, is just about the minimum that you can get away with. The old Fender Supers and things like that are good examples of a good 50-watt amp. If you're going to get a solid state amp, you can count on needing to up your output by 50% or so. You're going to need a solid state amp of 75 to 100 watts to come close to what a 50-watt tube amp will do. A Fender Twin is a good amp to have. That'll usually get you by in club kinds of situations. I think that if you're going to go out and buy an amp, go ahead and, particularly if you're going to buy a small combo amplifier, in other words, an amp that has a speaker built in to the same cabinet as the amplifier portion of the rig, a real portable kind of thing, go ahead and get something that's going to be loud enough that you can take it to a club and jam with people. Practice amps, I don't know, I think they're kind of limited in their practicality. I practice with this thing. It's kind of hard to move around, but it has a good master volume on it, and it'll get good tone at very low volume levels. I personally prefer to use a 100-watt amplifier just because there's more tonal versatility. I can get more different kinds of sounds out of the amplifier that way. I can get a clean sound at a pretty high volume. And I have, of course, the flexibility to get a very distorted kind of sustaining sort of a tone. A sealed back cabinet, in a lot of cases, makes for a cleaner on-stage sound simply because there's not out-of-phase sound being blown out of the back of the cabinet. Of course, if you're going to buy a tube combo amplifier, you're not going to find any with sealed backs because the tubes have to have some air in order to stay cool. And so the back of a tube combo amp is always ventilated. At least on most of them I've seen. There are a couple out there that have sealed cabinets. If you're going to use effects, I would really recommend that you learn how to get some good tone and get some good feeling without those effects. Matter of fact, I would recommend that if you do already have them, to put in some time practicing without them. Because for one thing, even though electronic devices seem to get more and more reliable, every now and then on a complicated setup you're going to have breakdowns. And it's nice to be able to continue to make music if you don't have your whole effects rack working. The other thing is I think that it'll just strengthen your playing overall if you practice some without those effects and try and learn to get some tone and some feeling from your instrument without using all that. Same thing goes for distortion. In other words, all this nasty turn it up and wail. That stuff's like a drug. You play with a lot of distortion for a long time, and it becomes hard to play with clean tones. So I recommend that you practice some using clean tones, and drag out your acoustic guitar and practice with that some. Guitar-wise, it's largely a matter of personal taste, but you want to find an instrument that'll stay in tune, playing the style that you like to play. I tend to be kind of rough on the tuning of an instrument, so I've selected instruments that have a locking device on the nut and that clamp the strings rather than rely on a ball end to hold the string in place at the bridge. This particular unit was made by Floyd Rose. I really do like it. One thing I really enjoy about it is the fact that you can, in order to keep from having to change strings all the time, you can wind a lot of string onto the peg, and whenever you break a string, you almost always break the string right down here by the bridge. So all you have to do is unclamp the broken end of the string, take it out, reel some, unclamp the string at this end, reel some string off, and poke the string back down in the clamp down here, and tighten the clamp down here, bring it up to tune, and clamp it down here. And you can do that without having to buy a string, or without having to have an extra string on the gig, which is handy if you're a forgetful guy like me. This is a Kramer Elliott Easton model. It is capable of a whole lot of different kinds of tones. Its basic configuration is that of a Fender Stratocaster, so it will nearly duplicate all the tones that a Fender Stratocaster is capable of. In addition to that, it has a humbucking pickup down here that you can switch into a humbucking kind of position and get some of the more heavy sorts of distortion sounds heavy sort of bridge pickup sounds that are popular in music today, a lot of which originated with those neck pickup Les Paul sounds that Jimmy Page got back in the good old days of yore. I'll just kind of switch this thing around so you can hear some of the tones it does. This is the humbucking tone. This is the neck pickup kind of Strat tone. This is the middle pickup, kind of a Strat tone. You hear this on a lot of Buddy Holly records. This is more of a Telecaster kind of a tone, Telecaster neck pickup sort of a tone. Real twangy kinds of sounds. Fender guitars are generally characterized by a real twangy kind of tone. Out of phase kind of Fender sound, Fender Strat sound. A lot of country players like that tone. Neck pickup and middle pickup kind of Strat out of phase tone. A lot of blues players like that tone. Also, this guitar will almost get a two pickup Gibson kind of a sound. Kind of a B.B. King kind of a tone, you know. In addition to that, this guitar has a kind of an odd feature in its volume control. Most of your electric guitars, whenever you turn the volume down, you're going to notice that some of the edge goes out of the tone, some of the brilliance goes out of the tone. This guitar has a capacitor in it to where whenever I turn the volume down on the guitar, the brightness and the cleanness of the tone is retained. Because it rolls off the bass and the mid-tones faster than it rolls off the highs. Whenever I have this guitar turned all the way up, it's a real fat, bassy sounding instrument. Whenever I roll it back, it becomes a real bright, twangy kind of an instrument. So some of my, whenever I use a volume knob, my technique's going to be a little bit different from a lot of y'all's. You kind of have to adjust your use of the volume knob to the equipment and to the guitar that you have, as far as the volume knob on the guitar. Let's see, what else? Oh yeah, by the way, folks, I recommend developing your ear and never let these go to pot. Always try and make sure that you hear notes and stuff. But get one of these and learn how to use it. An electric guitar tuner, it'll make you make it a lot easier for you to go and play at jams and stuff like that. If you're gonna go visit some strangers and stuff. And pick with them some. it's nice to be able to have everybody's instrument tuned to a standard. And that way the music sounds good and you can have a good time. Other than that, sing with your guitar when you play with it. What I mean by that is try and scat with your guitar. That'll make sure that that you're aware of the notes that you're playing. It's also good for your singing, I imagine. If you're gonna do something with the guitar, for a lot of people, it'll get you working in a band faster if you can develop your voice a little bit. So I recommend that. I think that's a good thing to do. Gee whiz, that's all I can think of to say. Hope I haven't frightened your children.